Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Virgin Stars Podcast third season. Hi, my loyal listeners. Thank you for your continued support. It's an amazing episode because Geoffrey Thorne returns to the mothership to discuss X-Force from Marvel Comics. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Thorne. Thank you for coming back to the Virgin Stars Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.
So my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you the first time about Green Lantern and everything, so it's good to have you back.
Listen, this is a nice Friday thing to do. This is a
Yes, it
beautiful cap for a lovely day.
is. So last time we spoke, we were talking about Green Lantern. So today we're talking about X-Force, which is from Marvel Comic Books. So how do you get involved in X-Force?
The simple story is I pitched them a story. It's kind of the way this stuff works is, like, I've been working in and out of Marvel Comics for, God, it seems like since 2016, something like that. So not like a one of the cool kids or one of the big guns or anything, but basically once you've pitched multiple stories and they've gone over and everything's basically fine, it doesn't guarantee you anything, but you can generally get a pitch heard, right? Like, they probably reject it, but they will at least take the pitch. So that's a hurdle you don't have to keep going over. In this case, make an incredibly long story shorter.
That's okay.
I pitch blind. I don't know what's going on backstage. So when I pitched, I had an idea for a story centering around Forge and Sage and a bunch of other mutants. And I pitched it out. Well, I asked Tom Brevoort if he'd be interested in hearing it because I had just learned he was taking over the X-Force office. And that there was going to be some big shakeup in terms of the current Krakoa sort of giant storyline that was coming to an end after 5 years, which I did not know when I came up with the story. And I said, so I've got this neat idea for Forge, probably a miniseries because it's Forge and he doesn't have a big enough fan base to warrant an ongoing just about him, although there are enough stories, you could just keep going indefinitely. And he's like, all right, let's hear it. So I pitched it out to him. He's like, that's actually pretty cool. It's very different. I see what you mean. We are sort of setting up what the next phase is going to be. And that is not an X-Men story. That is a Forge and Sage story. So what we probably do is after whatever our initial rollout is of the main X-Men titles, and probably there will be a Wolverine or something like that, one-shots like that of more prominent characters. After that, this is something we would absolutely do a miniseries of. And I was like, great. So he's like, flesh it out. More pitches are generally quite broad out. After you get to a certain point, you can pitch a general thing because they know you can do it. So you don't have to get into as much detail as you would if you were just coming in cold and they have no idea who you are. So I went away. Month and a half goes by. I gave some more thought to the thing. What would the first issue be like, et cetera, what other characters I would bring in, all of this kind of stuff. And I get an email from Mr. Brevoort basically saying, hey, so that thing we talked about. I'm like, you didn't forget. He's like, I didn't forget. However, I was talking to Mark Basso, who is currently and will be continuing on as the editor of X-Force. I told him your pitch, and he's like, that could be X-Force. And I was like, okay. And he's like, so could it be X-Force? And I was like, I don't have a title for it. Sure, call it X-Force. Right. And he's like, well, slow down, Speedy. Let's put you and Mark together and see what you guys can work out, because X-Force is X-Force, and the thing you pitched, there's going to need to be some jockeying around about that. So whatever, it's the way business works. Basically, you come in with your pitch cold, and then it gets modified to fit, basically. So Mark and I had a lovely, very long conversation, a couple of them actually, about how would we turn what was essentially, I don't know if your audience is big up on all comics, but there was a great comic series called Planetary some years ago. This was much more in the vein of that. No no costumes, not no battles, but low on the big sort of cosmic epic battles, much more about well, this is weird. What the hell? Thank God we have superpowers or we'd be dead already. It was kind of that kind of a vibe. And Mark was like, well, it's X-Force, so gotta blow stuff up, gotta smack people around, and I was like, no, I get it. I get it. So we talked it out. The plot, essentially, there's a difference between, and people will attribute different characteristics to both of these words, but there's a difference between plot and story, right? So
Mm,
story is the story. It's like, and then these guys do this, and they're going to accomplish this, and here are the people, and he loves her, and she loves her, and there's a love triangle, and there's a whole thing, right? That's the story, right? The plot is how do you do it? The plot is the framework upon which the story hangs.
mm,
So you can take in and out elements of plot. You can add characters. You can subtract them. Events. Those are all malleable like Legos, right? Because as long as the story continues to be told the way you want, the details you can fudge them as you
mm,
go. So we did a lot of fudge, basically. What was going to be a very close-knit, sort of quiet Hellblazer-esque, Hellblazer planetary tone book turned into what you guys got. And at one point, I was like, well, if it's now X-Force, it should have a lot of members because the word force is not three guys running around doing stuff. Um, and so I had it up to, I think, 11 or 12 characters. And then Mark was like, well, yeah, except some of them we don't want to use right now for various reasons. And some of them you can't have because they're already in an X team, one of the big three. Now they knew what they were doing. So all three of the upcoming X books now had their rosters set. So a couple of the characters, not many actually, but a couple of the characters that I wanted to use, they were like, well, they're spoken for essentially. And since your X Force is completely clandestine and off the books, it'd be very difficult for those stories to them to jump in and out, right? That like
mm.
until the rest of the world knows your X Force exists, your team is your team and nobody can come in or out, basically. I was like, yeah, that's basically what I was thinking too. And luckily, the core team um was who I wanted. So it was sort of all the extraneous extra members that took it up from 4 or 5 up to 11. Those all went away, and thank God, because now that I see what the book is, there's no way I could have done all of that. But what I was left with is essentially what you got, and there was a little bit of sort of um, using Captain Britain and Rachel because they're a couple, and I was like, well, right now I feel like they're a box set. They really only just got together in the last part of the previous sort of story run. So they've only been a couple for a minute. So let's not break them up too fast. Like let's let them have some time together. There is an undetermined amount of time between the end of Krakoa and the beginning of the From the Ashes era. Like we haven't set a fixed, or as far as I know, we have not set a fixed number of weeks or months or whatever. It's like it could be days after, or it could be weeks after, could be months after. It's like it's kind of up to the reader how long the gap is. But and that's kind of it. And we just got down to writing. Marcus Stowe came on board. He started doing designs. Um, Marcus is great. He's a perfect fit for the kind of story I'm trying to tell. Um, it is in many ways meat potatoes comic books
Mm.
in that I'm not trying to do anything extra. There's no giant flex going on here. Um, I wanted to see if we could just tell a straightforward superhero story using these characters, and there's some mystery and there's some soap opera aspects to it, and all that kind of stuff. And we're certainly dropping clues to things as you go that you may not realize are clues at the time. But um, it's mainly can we just have some fun? Um, Whether you liked Krakoa, just let's call it Krakoa because it was 5 years of one gigantic plot line um, spread over many, many different books and writers and artists and all of that. But it was very complex. It was a giant chandelier of events and lives and deaths and changes and betrayals and it was great, but it was a lot, like a lot. So at least for X Force, I was like, let's not have it need to be so much. Let's be like, you can jump in any issue, right? At least up to a point. You'll be able to jump in at any issue, and you don't need to read the prior unless you want to. The story is laid out for you. You know exactly what the stakes are and what's happening in the book that you have in your hand. And then hopefully the ride is a fun ride. Um, I'm deeply in love with Marcus's work. The entire team is actually excellent. Um, and it reminds me of how I felt when I saw those first Cockrum and Lean and Claremont X-Men books when they first came out, where you were just like, where are they going to go next? Why is everyone trying to get them? Good God. Because at the time I didn't have any of the backstory. I was just picking up these comics. And I definitely took my tonal vibe from that era. Like, we can get back to that. Also, they only gave me 20 pages per issue, which I was not used to. I prefer the old 24 pages per issue. Those extra 4 pages can give you a lot. And the last big thing I'd done was, I guess, Blood Syndicate, which was, I think, 22 pages. Maybe it was only 20, but it's a difficult fit for me. I tend to want to work bigger than that. I like a 24-page book, but it is what it is. So it meant that there are certain things that could not be expressed the way I would naturally try to express them. They had to be doled out differently over more issues, essentially. So, and that's where we are. We're about issue 3 is about to come out. I'm happy. The company's happy. The numbers are good. The audience seems to dig it for the most part. I think some people were like, wait, I don't like him, but this is a good comic book. And I'm like, okay.
Sorry for making a good comic book, I guess.
God forbid. So yeah, so it's fun for us, and I hope it's fun for the illustrators. I hope I'm not cracking them, but it's definitely fun for me. Mr. Basso and his editorial team seem to be having a good time. And I'm just taking it light, dude. I'm just having fun with it. It's just fun. Issue 3, people are gonna be like, what? It literally only gets crazier every issue. Like, some of the criticism was, well, this is just a normal issue 1. And I'm like, right, you guys just came out of like Lord of the Rings. Of course, it's just a normal issue 1, but every consecutive issue gets crazier than the previous issue. You'll see. It's only going to keep getting crazier. You'll be like, what is even happening?
No,
Yeah, it's
now,
fun.
the thing about your original pitch to what it is now, the moment you label it X-Force, there are expectations that are immediately stamped into the comic book. You're immediately forcing it to be part of the larger X universe because it's not just Forge and Team, it's now X-Force, and there's a legacy of X-Force. There's a history of the team.
Yes.
There's immediately being tied into a larger continuity with all the other X title that you now have to address because you're X Force.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did that stamp of X Force change how you had to approach the comic book?
Okay, 2 things, and this is me being either a jerk or really smart, depending on who you're talking to. But I tend to want to write things that are in my little corner of the universe
Hmm.
because I don't like being beholden to what a bigger, more powerful writer may wish to do that contradicts the story that I came in with, right? Because any such fight like that, the smaller writer will lose, right? Like, we'll talk about Mosaic one day when we have a lot of free time and you're a little drunk. Um, but um, but in this particular case, it was relatively simple because it's not. I don't think Tom pitched this, Tom McGraw. I don't think he pitched it this way. There seemed to be a weird ripple of expectation that this was going to be some kind of hard reboot after the end of Krakoa. But what it really is, yeah, all that happened and it was crazy as hell. And now what? Right? So our team is more like, in some ways, the old Defenders, the non-team team.
Hmm.
They're a team because Forge put them all in the same uniform, but they don't have a sort of central, like, we're here to protect mutants from evil humans, or we're here to stop Mr. Sinister or Magneto and his band from taking over the world or whatever. We don't have that core thing. Our thing is we're just trying to save the world one adventure at a time. basically, and each person has their own reason for being in it. So in connecting to the rest of the team, all the X writers are in a Discord together, um, and we share data. So even though my guys are completely off the books and nobody knows what they're up to, it doesn't mean that everyone thinks that those characters are dead, right? It's not like they disappeared. It's just no one knows they're running around doing X-Force stuff, right? Because no one like, is there an X-Force? Why would there be an X-Force? We disbanded all of that, right? So, now why would you call it X-Force? It doesn't do any of the things that the other X-Force did, right? But uh, we are in tandem. The universe is progressing, and we are all aware of where and how it's progressing. So there will be little cameo shots in X-Force, occasionally showing what one or more of the other, either groups or individuals, is up to at this moment, right? Should maybe show you a slice of an adventure that, let's say I use Jed McKay's X Team. You might get a shot of them doing something that applies to an X-Force adventure, but they don't know that they're in an X-Force adventure. All they know is, holy crap, this weird thing happened. We have to fight it. And then it went away. What was that? Right? Um, until we reveal at some point, I'm thinking, I don't know how long we can keep them completely secret. So I'm guessing at some point, some of the team members will reveal to some people, yeah, we're doing this weird thing. But so yeah, I know what's going on in all the books. We've read everybody knows what's going on in X-Force. We're constantly talking to each other about not stepping on each other's toes, right? Like, oh, was anybody using this character? Well, I was going to blow him up in issue 5. Well, do you have to? No, he hasn't been introduced yet. I can blow up somebody else, like that kind of stuff. Um, and also, could we do a tie-in thing that isn't an official crossover, but that it's clearly these things are happening together. So there's that kind of activity going on. But for all practical purposes, from a reader's purposes, if you're reading X-Force and none of the other books, you don't have to read any of the other books.
Now,
So yeah,
now you said something that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to poke at you a little bit.
go.
You talked about them being off the books.
Yes.
However, that doesn't imply there are books or the need for money. Let's put it that way.
Well, Forge is crazy rich. That's one of the things people always forget.
Okay, I see. I did not know
For,
Ford was crazy. I never thought of him that way.
Forge is crazy rich. Forge is
Okay,
like Tony Stark rich. People always forget that. If you go back to the introduction of Forge, he had, well, I'm now giving him 2, but he had an entire plaza in Texas for some reason that was like his personal Avengers Mansion Stark headquarters. It was insane. The inside of it was like holographic floors and like floating robot things, and Forge has his own Forge technologies essentially, and based on his patents that come from his crazy inventions, he's rich. So we gave him an estate in Montana, which is where we meet him, and he also continues to have that place in Texas. That didn't go away. Nobody ever blew that up.
okay.
Forge is really rich,
See, I did
like
not.
rich,
I don't think
rich.
I ever. I mean, I've watched. Like I said, I think I said it the last year. My knowledge of the X-Men is somewhat limited. I know Ford from the animated series from the '90s.
Right.
I know him a little bit from appearances in the Candy X-Men books, but I didn't know him well enough to know. It's like they never ever bring up the fact that he's loaded.
Yeah, Forge is really rich, like really rich. Also, Elizabeth Braddock, she's rich. She's a peer of the realm. They have estates and a lighthouse in Wales or Cornwall. They have a lighthouse in Cornwall. They have 2 estates, one in Essex, one in London. Like they are rich. Like 2 of the characters are filthy rich in this story.
Okay.
Also, technically, this is something I'm adding because I really love the character of Sage. Sage is also secretly crazy rich, right? Every Sage is every hacker who's ever stolen money from anyone who didn't deserve to have that money. And she's been stacking up chips for as long as you've known her secretly because she didn't need it for anything. She's always running with X people, and there's always free room and board with that,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, Sage not only has multiple identities, she has a giant multiple bank accounts all over
Okay.
the world. where she can, if she needs to just go somewhere, oh, Madam Chapeau, you're here today, right? It's like, yes, I haven't been here in 6 months. How's it going, Marie? Well, we kept the grounds as you like them. Is the fridge fully stocked? Absolutely, madam. The horses are ready. It can be anything. Like Sage, oh my God, she is God's gift to writing. So in terms of finances, they don't have a problem with that. Um, uh, I'm guessing, and now you brought it up, I may make text of it. Forge is underwriting the operation.
Okay.
The other thing you should note is, regardless of what's going on in the other X books, after issue 1, the time between issues is at most many hours. Like the entire first little bit of this takes place within about 48 hours. Like from the middle of the first issue to issue 5 or 6 is up 48 hours. So they're moving fast. Like it's not like these potential cataclysms start and then, oh, we solved that. Let's go have a beer. It's like, oh, damn, there's another one. Let's go. Right. Like, and the question which should become, how are we going to keep doing this?
Right.
Right. Like we got to stop and eat and sleep. I have family, So at some point that question might come up. But yeah, Forge, I like the fact of reminding people that Forge is wealthy. There are a lot of things I'd like to do with Forge that I don't know that I can because I am not actually Cheyenne myself. And a lot of these companies have very big fears about accidentally offending someone, some group of people, whoever they may be. I'm like, I won't, but they don't know me. They're not going to trust me not to offend someone.
Right,
Like,
right, right.
clearly I'm not trying to offend anyone. I made Forge the leader. Like, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but whatever. We'll see what we can do in that regard. But yes, there will be definitely situations where you're going to be like, wait, Forge is living like that? Holy crap.
Well, as it is, the guy owns a plane that self-repairs. That can't be
Yes.
cheap. That's not
None
cheap.
of this stuff is like, that's another thing. It's like, it's one thing to be able to build stuff, but you still need materials.
Right.
Like, where you're not magically getting those. So, where are those coming from? Right. But he does, I've introduced already in issue 1. Forge has a lot of patents. And basically, the way I think of it, I hope that others will take up this idea, is Forge makes devices, but he makes them without an intellect behind what he's doing. My feeling is, if Forge is going in a lab like Reed Richards or Tony Stark and going, okay, well, this theory of physics means this, and this, and I'm going to have to, God, I'm going to have to dig up some of that, and I'm going to have to steal some unstable molecules or something from. He doesn't do it like that. He just gets an idea, a picture in his head of what the machine needs to be that will solve problem X, and then he builds it.
Mm.
And then later, either he or other people take what he built apart and reverse engineer it to go, okay, how does this work? The flying car, it does what? Right? Look, I don't know. We just needed a flying car that could also turn into a robot. So that's what this one does. Yeah, but how could you possibly make the gears? Like, it's like, well, that's your job, Phil. You need to take it apart. You make a lot of money in my company by taking apart my devices, reverse engineering them and drawing the schematics so that then I patent them. And then other people theoretically can license those patents and build devices, right? And most of Forge's devices never get patented because they're too freaking dangerous for the world to just have.
But see, that's the thing I was thinking about when you talk about patents. Obviously, in our world, we don't have a Forge creating unbelievable tech all the time.
Yes.
Now, in the world of Marvel, because it's bigger than X-Men, it's Marvel, you now have a man making unbelievable tech stuff. Is the tech stuff that he's doing then, I guess, assume purely government, or is it everyday people? And then what does the world look like when you
Okay,
have
from
Forge
the
making
from
the
the
tech?
public's point of view, he would be more like an Oracle or a one of the tech companies that the average person doesn't know their name, but their stuff is in everybody's tech,
Okay.
right? So um he is not a front load like the new Forge, whatever is coming out. He doesn't do lines of product like that. But in Stark Industries, there's a stack of Forge Tech devices that support Stark Industries stuff because Tony's just a normal genius. He's a
Hmm.
genius, He's a crazy genius, but he doesn't have to invent every aspect of the stuff that he's doing. He's inventing a new kind of car, but he doesn't have to invent every kind of transistor that goes
Hmm.
or spark plug that goes into that car. We'll just go, oh, buy a Forge Tech spark plug or use this design that came from Forge Tech, right? We'll license this and add it in, right? And then Forge's company gets a little bit of the payday out of that, right? And Forge has done this enough times with enough companies across the board. And what I presume, because he's a basically heroic person, that for the most part, and we're not going to do Armor Wars because that's a whole other thing, his stuff is innocuous enough that, like, you're not going to use any of his stuff to make a better gun,
Hmm.
basically, right?
Because that's what I was thinking as well, is that you said things just come to Forge, he's just making stuff that comes in his head. Then if he's doing that, he kind of I kind of go back to the line from Jurassic Park from Malcolm. So busy thinking of whether or not he could, he doesn't have to think if he should. Now,
Oh, that no,
Forge
that's
does stuff. Does he realize the consequences of what's that could
I
become?
mean, no, 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 he cannot do that. It's well, my feeling is this. Again, I may be the only one who thinks this, and as soon as I'm off the book, some other writer can come in and go, "Nah, no, it's true." But um, if it's a superpower, then that means Forge is not really thinking when he does it, right? He's
Hmm.
doing something other than using his intellectual capacity. So, in a certain way, let's say Forge is looking at, we need to get across a distance, a very great distance, and these are the materials I have in front of me to do that. And then he quickly, or not so quickly, depending, goes and builds a device, right? And that device is like, oh, it's going to bend the laws of physics and shift us over there super fast, right? But the way it does that, it might eat all of the potential kinetic energy and everything that's around it in order to power itself up. Now, Forge doesn't necessarily know it's going to do that
Hmm.
until it does it, right? And then everybody's like, Forge, yes, it is a great transportation device, but one could just drop this somewhere and kill a bunch of people. Yeah, I know. I'll just take it apart. Right. And no one else can build Forge Tech. You have to dismantle it and examine how it works because he's just making stuff and it's his mutant power that's allowing a lot of this stuff to intuitively work. Like he's got a massive mechanical intuition, essentially. But he doesn't have any ethical connection to it because he doesn't know all the functionality. He knows what its primary purpose is.
Hmm.
But like secondary, tertiary, quaternary purposes, yeah, you'd have to be thinking to think of that. He does not design, you would not walk into his workshop and find, oh, here are the plans for the Mark One. There is no Mark One. It's just build this, bonk, done. It does what I said it would do. Perfect. Let's go. Doesn't have to test it. It's definitely going to work, right? And the reason is if it has any of the problems that a normal inventor would have, it's not a superpower, right?
Hmm.
Even Tony Stark, Reed Richards, they make prototypes that fuck up. Forge never does. His first device works the way it's supposed to. There's no test phase,
For
right?
but for
So
instance, though, talking about Stark inventing, technically in the movie though, it's more of it's in the movie, but not as much as in reality. I think it was Ant-Man. Like he creates Ultron by accident.
yes,
Yeah. Does Forge have a capacity to create an Ultron by accident?
theoretically, we've established many AI automatons. Depending on what ability to adapt and expand themselves each automaton is built with, theoretically, yes, he could invariably, he could accidentally create something that goes rampant and turns into Ultron. There's no built-in failsafe. The only thing I would say is I doubt Forge has ever built a device that Forge can't shut off.
Okay.
Like everyone else might have a problem, but he's Forge. He built it. So he has the off switch at all times. He might have to get to it. Like it might be preventing him from getting to it. But I like there was this thing about, was it Falcon and the Winter Soldier or Captain America and the Winter Soldier, the show, where the Wakandans all show up and they're like, "Oh Lord, the Winter Soldier's going to make mincemeat of the Dora Milaje," and they're like, "Tack tack," and his arm falls off. And people were outraged, and I was like, "Why on earth would the Wakandans build this man a weapon like that they couldn't instantly dismantle?" at any time. Why would you give him something that can hurt you?
Right,
You
right.
wouldn't, right? So I don't think Forge is building any devices that can hurt Forge.
Okay. I, it does bring up an interesting thing about your team. Your team, for those who don't quite, so we have Ford, Sage, Captain Britain, Tank, Ascani, and Surge as
Yeah.
as the team. Um, so beyond Forge, someone who like me is more of a tertiary fan of the X world. They're
Mm-hmm.
not household names. You didn't put on Deadpool. You don't have
No.
your Gambit. Guys that people just recognize. Um, how difficult was to find organic ways to kind of express what they actually do?
Um, that's an interesting question. La, 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 la. Well, the easy part, the hardest part was how do I show Sage's powers working? So that's why I made her the narrator of the first part of the story. You're inside Sage's head throughout. So oh, wow. And in fact, Sage was really overwritten in script form. She's doing a lot of things simultaneously, but those text boxes took up too much page space. So most of them had to be omitted, right? Or you couldn't see the tasty art. So that was relatively easy. Forge and Sage both sort of talk their powers a lot,
Hmm.
right? Like, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm doing about it. Yes, I can build that. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm processing. I'm analyzing. So that was relatively simple in terms of text. Um, Surge's powers are obvious. Once you see her, she has lightning powers, and apparently she can move super fast. So that's an easy thing. Everyone knows what the Flash does. Marcus just instantly can draw that done. The hard Tank is Tank. His name is Tank, and he hits stuff. Like, he looks like what he does,
Yeah.
right? Or I should say, it looks like what it does, or they look like what they do. We are not guaranteeing what Tank is at all yet. Um, People are like, "Who's Tank?" I'm like, "What's Tank? You don't know?" Like, but and in terms of Captain Britain and Ascani, they're both telepaths and telekinetics. Both of them have power signatures, theoretically. Ascani, Rachel Summers or Rachel Gray, depending on when you found her and what you want to call her. She is the child of Cyclops and Jean Grey. So she's traditionally been played with some sort of a fire effect around her powers. Technically, that shouldn't exist without the Phoenix in her, which it currently is not. But that's what people expect to see when she uses her powers. So we just like, fine, fine. That's what her powers look like. And in terms of Captain Britain, she used to be Psylocke, and she had that sort of butterfly flare effect whenever she would use her telepathy, at least. Um, we've kept a version of that, and it mutates depending on her mood and the situation. But those are the ways you can show what they can do. And again, there's the juxtaposition of dialogue versus what you're seeing. So if you don't read it, what you might see is, and issue one's a good example. We see Forge and Sage jump out of a plane. You see the soles of at least one of their boots, and you see, oh, there's something glowing on the soles of their boots. That's why they didn't need parachutes. They landed fine. Obviously, it was those weird boots they were wearing, whatever that was. That's without the text. The text tells you everything if you read it. You should always read it. I don't write all these words for nothing. But with the telekinetics and the telepaths, you do run into the issue of what are they actually doing? So there's a shot where they're all flying through the streets of this Japanese town, and Rachel has lifted up Sage and Forge, who can't fly, and she's pulling them along telekinetically with them. There's dialogue that says that's what she's doing. Marcus puts a little aura around them to show, oh, the chick with the fiery power signature did something fiery to them and they're flying with them. Right. That's again, if you're not reading the comic book, why wouldn't you read the comic book? Read the comics. But so with that, and with Betsy, Captain Britain, it's been an interesting road for her because initially she was a telepath, telekinetic, mostly telepath. She starts amping up her telekinetic powers, and then, due to a long and complex sequence of events, she ends up trapped in the body of a Japanese woman. Um, and a great many people always thought Psylocke was Japanese, which she is not. She was always a British, here of the realm, a white chick. trapped in this body. And so to get her out of that, they said, oh, that other body was this other person, and they got melded together weirdly, and now they're separate. So that other person, Quanon, is now Psylocke. And Elizabeth, Betsy, became, again, through a bizarre sequence of events, became Captain Britain, which her brother used to be. So I say all that to say, the way her power is displayed in the old days was she would have these weird, what they call psychic knives, which sort of form around her hand. And it was the idea, it was kind of like the telekinetic version of the Iron Fist, if the Iron Fist was a blade, right? And that's great, but that's kind of what Quanon's doing over in the X book. So, but with Betsy, she's also Captain Britain, which is a magical defender of the multiverse type of character, right? So her powers are mixed with magic. So what you see is her most traditionally, she has I hate to say this, I really do, but it's the easiest way to describe it, sort of Green Lantern construct shield and a Green Lantern construct sword. Plus, she can do psychic blasts and things like that. But something we're taking for granted the audience knows is that in order to make these constructs, it kind of shuts down her abilities to do the other things, because it's the idea is that that's the totality of all of the psionic juice that she's got is going into these weapons. So if they're exposed, then she's just fighting, right? If she has the weapons, then she's just fighting. She's not like brain blasting people and doing all that. If she doesn't have the weapons, it actually might be worse. If you don't see the weapons, you might be in more trouble, right? So that's how we do it. There are things with my writing, I make certain assumptions about the audience, which may be unfair. There is the notion, and I agree with it, which is every comic is the first one for somebody, and this book, probably more than any of the others I've written, works that way. You can literally, if you miss 1 and 2 and you step in right now, you won't be lost. You don't need to know what happened in those adventures. They're just great adventures, right? How the team got together, their first fight, second fight. Oh, this is how they work together, and you get a lot of in depth of how Sage thinks and works. But if you came in right now, don't need all that because we're just having another adventure. And with that, but on the other side, I think we should stop pretending that 10-year-olds are reading these comics, right? It sucks. I wish they were, but they're not. The people who are reading X comics, for the most part, are people who've been reading X comics. So it sucks. I hate that. I want new blood to come in. I wish there were 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds going, ooh, X-Force. But, and maybe there are a few, but the vast majority of people reading comics are well into their adulthood and have been reading comics for a while, and in particular X-related comics for quite some time. So these characters, with the exception maybe of Surge, and like you said, I don't know details about Forge because of the way he's been played, or I don't know details about Sage because she doesn't get used that often, or the way she's used is basically with Forge and Sage especially, and why I wanted to use them is these are the kind of characters that are kind of like Q in a James Bond movie, right? Nobody's showing up to see the adventures of Q, right? I mean, I would. I think that'd be pretty awesome. But I'm not most people. That is not the audience they want. But for Sage and Forge in particular, the idea that they don't have dangerous offensive powers is ludicrous. So for many years, Forge has been played as the tech guy. He can build us anything we need. And Sage is played as the woman in the chair who can coordinate all activities and tell you all the schematics and give you the game plan. And she's Basil Exposition, basically, right? And I was like, okay, let's see what we can do with that. And we see in episode 2, for Sage, everything is math. Everything in the universe is math, and everything can be broken down into a series of equations, many of which are known to real science, and many of which, maybe most of which, are only known to Sage because of the size and capacity of the computer that is her brain. So she and the others will display powers, I think, that others will not be like. First thing was like, well, Forge can't. Oh, wait, maybe he should be able to do that. Yeah, that makes sense. Same thing with Sage. Well, she can't. Just that she's never done it before, but she should have been doing that before because that's inside her power set. So so that's basically how it works. It's not that difficult because I really wanted to use these characters. It would have been difficult if somebody had said, okay, Jeff, you're doing X-Force and this is the team. And I didn't care about Forge or Sage at all. I'm like, really? Forge and Sage? But that's the guy who builds their trucks. Why is he the leader? And she just sits there and tells people what to do. That's not interesting visually. Who wants to draw that? And I don't want to write it for the artist. Going to hate the book. Like he's going to hate every time we cut to her. She's going to be sitting somewhere with screens around her. I'm like, no, God, how boring, right? So, but luckily, I love these characters and I actually love them more the more I write them. Um, Especially ironically, I had some notions about Captain Britain in particular, but in writing her, based on all the changes that she's been through relatively recently, certainly during the Krakoa era, I'm like, I might need to pitch a book just about her. You know, I can't do it yet because I don't have the free time. I don't have the bandwidth for it. But she's just fascinating to me because she's both magic and a mutant. And
Hmm.
I'm like, there's only one other mutant that's like that, and her name is actually Magic.
Yeah.
You know, and her whole thing is a completely different thing, right? So I don't know. Oh, I guess the Scarlet Witch kind of counts, but yeah. So they're just growing on me in every way you would want characters to grow on you. Sage tries to take over the book every issue. She's like, "This is really about me." And I'm like, "No, it's not about you. It's a team book. It is not called Sage." She's like, "Yeah, it could be though. It could be about me though. You made me the narrator. You didn't do that by accident." I'm like, "Stop talking to me and do what I tell you." So
Well, one thing that's kind of interesting that you did in the first issue, you put in Deadpool, which is like one of the most famous X-Force characters in the history of
yes.
X-Force. Was it a tease, or were you just kind of being like, okay, here's your Deadpool. This is why he can't be on the team. Got him out of your system. Get rid of him.
Okay. That's like a whole country made of yes and no. But yes.
Okay.
Okay. Initially in the original pitch, there was no death. While we're developing the book, we realized when the book was going to actually drop, right? And some of the concerns, I don't care about. By the way, as the writer, I don't care about these things. I only pitch the stories I want to tell. These are the characters I want to use. These are stories I want to tell. You worry about all your company stuff. I don't care about that. Like, pay me. I'm going to write my stuff. Leave me alone. Right. However, the company does have concerns. And one of the concerns was you have zero marquee characters in this book. The marquee of this book is the literal marquee, X Force. No one looking at this book who loves X Force is going to go, well, that's the X Force I know.
Right.
And many people are going to be like, oh, right. So, do you feel uncomfortable putting Deadpool in the book? He's been in X Force before, even though some of your characters have also all been in X Force as well. They were never the lead marquee characters in those books. And in the case of uh, Captain Britain, she looks nothing like anyone would think she would look, remembering those old X Force books because she was Japanese in both of the last times she was in X Force, right? So can you put Deadpool in? And I was like, let me think about it. Not let me think about yes or no. Let me think about how I would do it
Hmm.
because I don't like Deadpool that much. I'm not a big giant Deadpool fan. Like to me, Deadpool is a flavor, not the meal. But I like the movies very much, but movies are discrete objects that only exist for 2 hours, right? Like an ongoing Deadpool book, I will never even, no, no, I would never write that. I would probably not ever read that. And one of my good friends wrote one,
Yeah.
but he's just not my favorite character because of the nature of his humor more than anything else. I don't know that I could sustain that on a monthly basis. I'd be like a couple of pages of Deadpool and I'm out, you know. So that's what you got, a couple of pages of Deadpool. But when we knew that it was going to drop around the time that the movie was going to open, I was like, well, clearly this is a naked movie promotion. So I'm going to mention it because Deadpool breaks the fourth wall all the time. So this is a little less straightforward wall break, but clearly let's just lean into it. Right. But the fun part is people are mad about how Forrest did Deadpool in issue one. And I'm like, so is Wade. Deadpool is also mad about it, right? But they killed Deadpool in some other book right after this adventure. So, you know, but I've reserved the right to bring Deadpool back at will, but it will be when you least expect it if he does come back. So
So, because you did mention that Deadpool, is going to come back at some point and some other things that you're doing.
I
Um,
didn't say he is going to come back. I said it was possible he could come back.
so when Deadpool comes back at some point later
Oh
on,
my God.
so my main thought is this. When Deadpool eventually disappears, things of that nature,
Wow.
um, how set is the roster of X-Force that you have going right now?
Okay. So the pitch was Forge will use the team as needed. The members of the team will shift as the mission shifts.
Hmm.
Um, I think the audience has been led to believe that means every issue we're going to get or lose a team member. That's not what it's going to be. They're on a mission right now that Forge put this team together to solve.
Hmm.
So um, one would be stupid to think, well, wait, really? You're just going to do an entire ongoing series of every issue they're fighting a different monster, and every issue they beat that monster, and then they move on to the next monster for the next issue? What kind of a comic book is that? Like outside of 1963?
Yeah.
Like, what, well, the answer is it's not that comic. At some point, this initial mission will be completed. And at that point, I'm presuming there'll be a deck reshuffle because he won't need this version of the team anymore,
Hmm.
right? And that's not counting. Remember, this is X-Men. This is the mutant mythology. At least one character didn't want to join. Captain Britain was like, I don't know. And then her girlfriend's like, no, we're in. Right? It's like, okay, Christ. Right? So there's at least one reluctant team member already, right? There's already a little bit of friction going on between Surge and the rest of the group, right? They're very mission specific, and they just released some pages for issue 3 where she's fighting with them. She's like, we can help people right now. And they're like, yeah, that's great, except that's not our mission, helping those people. We got to go over here and do the mission. And she's like, yeah, see ya with that. I'm going to go help some people. So clearly Surge is going to have some difficulty as this goes forward because all these others are used to being on teams like this. Surge is the only one who's never been on a team like
Hmm.
this. Really, any team. She was in a school, but she wasn't really on a team, right? Those were just her friends who had superpowers. In this case, this team has a very specific set of goals, and she sort of got pulled into it, but she can leave at any time. It's not like they could make her stay if she doesn't want to. Like, it's not that kind of a unit. So if they're going to continue the way Forge wants them to continue, they're going to come in and surgically fix the problem and then move on to the next problem, unless there's a gap, which is sort of what Forge tries to say to her in this bit. I'm only talking about this because they released the pages. She says we can help people. He says that's not the mission, but if we can solve the problem, then after that we can come back and help maybe. And she's like, you think I'm paying attention to you? That was nonsense what you just said. I'm going to go help them right now because you're an idiot, right? So, but they leave her, right? They don't
Hmm.
join her. They go and solve the problem. So that's going to create frictions within the group, which you need to have, right? There's the ongoing mystery of who or what Tank is. I mean, I guess people are assuming that everyone in the group already knows who and what Tank is. I don't know why you're assuming that. The only person in this group that I definitely know for sure as the writer knows who and what Tank is Forge. I don't know that the rest of them know. I just don't know. Right? It hasn't come up yet. They've been fighting things so much that it's just not, they're not sitting around having conversations. They're like running to the next thing. So, so yeah, the team roster will shift, but it won't be shifting like issue to issue to issue. What will happen, issue to issue to issue, is big giant swashes of Marvel lore will be injected in every issue. Things that you may know and expect, and things you're like, whoa. And you can see from the solicits, they've already shown some of the solicits, like, I wish they didn't do this, but the Man Thing's going to show up at some point, right? This character who they're about to go fight, Nuclo, he's a chunk of old Marvel lore from like back in the 70s, I think. Like that kind of crap's going to be cropping up throughout, right? we're going to reference old stories. We're going to reference characters and events from sometimes pre-Fantastic Four Marvel comics. There's going to be at least a couple of characters that show up that are that. Um, so the team roster will shift, but this team is the team for the foreseeable future. If we lose anybody, it will be due to injury or death at this point. Like,
So, well, one of the things that's important part of the team is the analog.
yes,
And the part of the team is once again you're going to extinguish threats before they become catastrophes, before they blow up. And the analog kind of tells them where these things are going to happen. So it's like it feels like it's a aspect of preterminism. Am I correct in that?
in a way, it's not as specific as like pre-crime where you see the crime and you know who did it and all of that stuff. Two things that are true of this thing. One, Forge is the only person who can interpret the effects that are coming out of this ball that he built, right? Sage is trying to catch up, but the Forge's mutation is what allowed him to create this thing. And it's largely his mutation that's being affected by it. So he's the only one who can sort of decipher the signals that are coming out. And what the information is here's where, here's when. What is it going to be? No clue till we get there, right? Literally no clue. It could be an individual, it could be a sequence of events that need to be stopped. That's, in my point of view as the writer, is sort of the fun of the book, right? Because, like, if left to my own devices, some weeks it would be Mission Impossible, some weeks it would be Galactus, right? It would just depend on what the analog says, go do X. But the best way I can describe the analog, literally just got asked about this in an interview, so I'm trying to refine the description. The analog is a cosmic object built by a human being, in the same way that the cosmic cube is a cosmic object built by human beings. People forget, because they came in late to the party, that back in the old days, 70s, I guess, a bunch of scientists got together and they built this thing called the cosmic cube, which is essentially a reality warping device. It's like a mini infinity gauntlet, like a localized infinity gauntlet. Okay. But those were just people. They weren't special in any way. They were just extremely smart people working in a very high-tech lab in the Marvel universe. So in the similar way, Forge went into his workshop with an idea based on having amped up his powers. I'm going to build this. And he did, the analog, and it does exactly what he needed it to do. But how is it doing that? You'd have to take it apart and figure it out, which is what Sage is consistently throughout. Like, wait, so how does it work again? How does it do what it's, because I'm looking at it and the stuff that I'm seeing doesn't make, I'm having, if I'm having a hard time processing what I'm seeing, that means no one can process what they're seeing. And you seem to be able to process it. Well, it's built to work for me.
Right.
And for it, like, I don't know what you want from me. Right.
I mean, the thing about it is like it's thinking about threats, but what thing that will become the next catastrophe. Is it possible that they're stopping individuals who may not actually become the threat that the analog is saying is going to be?
No, no.
Okay.
There's none. I don't. I generally don't like to do spoilers, but this MacGuffin is what it seems to be. There is no underlying sinister thing. The analog does. Listen, Forge's power is to make the things that he wants to do what he wants them to do. He built the analog. It does what he wants it to do. It is not, it doesn't have any intelligence. It's not secretly manipulating anyone. It's like, if you don't, someone needs, oh, by the way, it doesn't tell him, like, theoretically, the Avengers could stop this problem, or the Fantastic Four could stop this problem. The analog doesn't care about that. It just says, here's where it's going to be. You should be there and stop it. Right? Now, they could get there and find Doctor Strange already handling it, theoretically. And then that would be a lovely episode where we didn't have to do anything and we could just sit around and drink tea in Paris while Doctor Strange handles the monster. We don't have to do it. It's just, here's where it's going to be. And if no one does anything, end of the world. Each one of these is an end of the world event if allowed to continue. That's the importance of it all, right? But it's, no one's being secretly led to do something terrifying. We'll rephrase that. The analog has no agency. It does
Well,
not have an intelligence in it.
I guess the question I had, for instance, going back to say, Knucklo. Let's say it's like, well, Knucklo's going to do this, or is the interlock saying we need to stop this guy? And he goes to Knuckle, but however, for whatever reason, because he is own free will, decides I'm not going to do the thing it says I was going to do, so thus I wasn't going to be the problem. I'm not no longer would have been the problem.
Theoretically, I
Oh,
guess if you could, like, there's many ways you could stop a problem, right? You could convince Jeff not to blow up the bomb. You don't have to kill him or fight him. You could be like, why? And then the whole book could just, they will never let me do this as much as I would dearly love to, but you could show up and literally just talk the bad guy out of doing the thing. I
yeah.
think that would be an excellent comic book personally, but that will never happen. It's going to be smacking around and blowing stuff up. So, uh, um, but yeah, so yes, you whatever you need to do, and it could be as big or as small. I guess that was trying to get at an issue too, was you think that there's going to be some big cataclysmic fight, but ultimately all Forge had to do was touch the analog to a magical object and the event goes away. Now that's not going to work every time. That worked that time, right? But like if he had another constant, theoretically, I guess if he could have compressed the blackbird down into something he could hold in his hand, that would have done the job too, right? But um, going forward, I hope people don't think that there's some secret intelligence in there manipulating Forge's mind. There is no brain in there. It does not have an AI. It just says, go here. That's it. It is a very simple device doing a very complex task.
So, the question is, when you do a character like Fortune Sage, people of science, and with Sage you said mathematics. You also have someone on the team like Cam British, who's a person of magic. How frustrating is the world of magic to people of science, and vice versa?
Sage literally hates magic. She hates magic with a deep and abiding passion. She thinks it sucks on toast. It is the worst because it's outside the normal realm of physics, right? By definition, it bends, at least bends physics, right? Um, which it's not like she can't understand it. It's that it takes her so much processing time and power to work like, okay, I kind of see how that happened. You said this thing and then this effect happened. That shouldn't be possible, but it did happen. So now I got to think about it. So theoretically, you could immobilize Sage by doing if the magic you did in front of her was complex enough, that alone could immobilize her without you zapping her with anything. You just all she has to do is see you do something magical. And if the magic is of a sufficient complexity, she'd just be like, okay, I'm now analyzing and I'm not doing nothing else but that because that was a lot of data, right? The others are more soft with it. Forge himself is trained to be a shaman. Um, Captain Britain's job is magical, essentially in nature. She is appointed to a magical position and has duties and responsibilities based on this place, Otherworld, which is both magical and science based. It's like one of those universal hub type places where both systems exist simultaneously. But she has, I wouldn't say she has magical powers in the same sense that Doctor Strange does. She is a magical champion. So the things that go along with that mantle, she can do. Right. But it's not like she's going to suddenly go, oh, I now know I now have the spell to lift us all up into the sky. She's not a sorcerer. She's a magically powered. She's almost like she herself is a magical object.
Hmm.
Right? Whoever is Captain Britain is essentially a magical object, right? So, but how does that mix with her superpowers, which are theoretically, and at least in the Marvel universe, science based? They're nature based. Mutants are natural. They just have powers. So that's not an issue. I don't think the others, because remember, some of these people have interacted with magic, literally the character of magic, right? Either just hanging out or they were on teams with her. So it's not like they're not used to magic as a concept. Um, um, I know Rachel, at least, has fought Loki. So she knows that's real. I can't remember who was on which teams when they all went to Asgard more than once. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not like magic is a new concept for any of them. It's just that for Sage in particular, it's like, oh, Christ, this again. I hate this so much. Like, God forbid I send her to a magical realm. Like, I don't know what that would do to her. But
Hmm.
and I have a feeling again, Krakoa was very broad and very complicated. I don't remember if Sage went to Otherworld. I have a feeling she did not during the X of Swords event. I don't think Sage was on the team that went there. So I don't know that we've ever seen her in an entirely magical space. But based on what we just saw in issue 2, don't think she'll be happy in that space. So,
Now, another thing I think issue two brought up as an interesting issue when they go to Wakanda.
mhm.
They go to Wakanda, they save the world. There's that scene towards the end where they basically like, don't come back, which brings
Yeah.
up an interesting concept for the X Force, who are on some level interfering into the other nations' problems. And the
Oh,
question
they
is,
don't care.
to the nations themselves, are they how happy are they when like, oh, thanks for going to our borders and doing the thing we may or may not want to do to get involved with?
Um, they're pissing people off, definitely, for sure. Right. The thing in their suits, it's been alluded to. They have these ghost fields that Forge built. They can't be recorded in the old way, not like the magical old way where you couldn't see them. Only like anyone who sees them and interact with them remembers them and what they look like. But no cameras can record them. No satellites can track them as long as the ghost fields are up. Right. So um, so yeah, people like that are going to be pissed off. They don't care. And in fact, being told not to come back, sure, we won't come back unless the analog says we have to come back. In which case, we'll be right back. Tough shit for you. Like, no, it'll be tough shit for you. I promise you, sir. We don't make idle threats. If you come back here unannounced, you're going in a deep well. Well, we'll just have to see what you like. If I had 4 more pages, maybe we would have had that conversation, right? But yeah, they don't care about borders. They don't like my idea was to set up a team that theoretically, certainly down the line, would come into opposition against at least some of the other X teams, where
Hmm.
they're like, we're here to shut thing X down, and the other X team may be there to preserve it or find it or help it in some way for some other reason. And again, the analog doesn't tell you. All it says is here's where it's going to be and here's what's causing it. That's it. Doesn't say what the circumstances are. So you could theoretically have that situation where, well, come to kill the dragon, and the other team's like, you can't kill the dragon because the dragon's a mutant. Right? He's going to do something horrible. What's he going to do? We don't know, but it's going to destroy the world, so he has to go. And then you have a fight, and then you could say, finally, like this is Jeff's sense of humor. While the fight's going on, at some point, someone thinks to ask the dragon, what are you going to do? Or do you have any plans? Well, now that you mention it, I was going to eat Cuba. Why Cuba? It's a long story about dragon physiology, but it's just so tasty. You know, you can't eat Cuba. There's people on it. I know. It's what can I do? Um, can you not eat Cuba? I mean, I'm currently not eating Cuba. So yes, I cannot eat Cuba every day. But what's in it for me? And then the story would flip to, okay, well, here's what's in it for you not to murder everyone in Cuba,
Hmm.
right? Does that solve the problem? Forge looks at the analog, it turns green. Yep, problem solved, right? So it's like, Forge, what are you doing? None of your business. We got to go. We got another problem to go deal with. What the hell, Forge? Right?
Well, 'cause I mean,
So,
Wakanda made it pretty clear, don't come back. And he's
tough.
gonna end up having to probably come back at some point because Wakanda has a lot of shit going on at any given time.
Yeah, they got way too much crap going on. Also, I talked to the bosses, but I think they've announced there's some sort of Doom event going on or about to happen in Marvel Comics, but I wanted to have them go to Latveria. And oh no, you know what it was? The vampire thing was about to drop,
Okay.
and Doom was heavy in that, and I didn't know. So I was like, so one of the issues they're going to go to Latveria because I really like the House of Doom, those mutants. I wanted to deal with them really much, and they're like, not this year, right? And I was like, all right, fine. So yeah, they do not care. They do not care. They do not care.
Well,
They don't care.
see, that brings up an interesting issue as well that now got me thinking about it. They stop anything that's going to destroy the world. Marvel loves to have major events, things destroyed. Is it going to be a question of why weren't they there when this thing happened?
Sure. Well, I think the larger inference is, like we said before, um, the analog isn't saying Forge has to do anything. Right. One of the things that Forge has apparently not chosen to do is call all of his friends and say, hey, this thing's about to happen. You guys should run over there and handle it. No, he just put his own team together and I'll handle it, right? But theoretically, he's like, okay, well, I happen to be in Antarctica handling this weird cataclysmic thing. The analog says something's going to happen in Manhattan. Let me quickly call up who I know there that can handle this thing. Now, whether they believe me or not, that's a whole argument, but we only have 5 minutes, right? We can't get from Antarctica to New York in 5 minutes, no matter what we do. So, Tony, hey, Tony, Forge, what the hell? Yeah, see, there's a kid in the Bronx. I think he's going to turn into a reality nexus and it's going to eat the earth. So you're going to either have to put him in some kind of bottle or kill him, like in 5 minutes. What? Right? I got to go. I'm fighting a frost giant. Bye. You know, I don't imagine doing that, but yes, the events are just the events. There's no, the idea, I guess, is all the weird cataclysms that have ever assailed the Marvel Earth, not the whole universe, just the Earth. They had a small beginning of some kind, right? We never really, sometimes we even see the beginning. Like technically, the Hulk is an ongoing disaster, right? But the analog, had it existed at the time, would have said, "Hey, you need to be in Nevada, or I think it's Nevada, wherever Gamma Base was. You need to be in Nevada at Gamma Base, like now, because some weird stuff's going to happen. And they don't know what they're going to do when they get there, but the analog's going to say it's something to do with that bomb, that test they're about to do. So they're thinking, oh, nothing to do with Banner, nothing to do with Rick Jones. They might be present, but they're like, oh, we need to obviously stop this test. Simplest way to do that, destroy the device. Like, we don't have time to talk to anyone. So they just swoop in and destroy it, right? That would prevent the Hulk from happening, theoretically. But the time it would take for them to call someone and explain everything, which they can't explain all the details. So would you believe them? Like, I don't think Forge is interested in that conversation, right? Because you'd have to have so much credibility. It's not like Captain America calling you up and saying, okay, you got to go to the Bronx and get this kid and put him in some sort of stasis jug or kill him. What? Cat? Look, it's me. Do it. He's Captain America, got to go. But Forge, you, what you just said, examine it and think for my. Meanwhile, the reality warp is blah, 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 right. Forge doesn't want to take that chance. So it's less about you're the only ones. It's that this is the simplest straight line is to form this team and just do it.
So, what can listeners look forward to in the next issues of X-Force? Post issue 2, because issue 2 is already out.
All right. So issue 3 drops next week. And what's the question?
What's next for our listeners for X-Force?
Okay, they're going to Cambodia. They're going to fight a micro kaiju, I guess, in the form of this character Nucleus, who you see on the. They've already, like, he's on the cover, for God's sakes, like the guy they're punching. And there's chatter about it on the internet. They're going to fight him, and hilarity will ensue. That's all. Like, things will keep happening. But a lot of the traps that people think the book's going to fall into, believe me, I already know we're not falling into any of that. It's not going to be what you think, or at least those of you who think it's going to be monster of the week. Okay, okay. Imagine better, kids. Just think bigger, better thoughts than that. We're going somewhere. It's just not obvious yet. And yeah, we're gonna scrap around with Nucleus, and there's gonna be some arguments and some distrust is gonna be there, and suspicions and mysteries and all the stuff you want in a 20-page comic book.
Well, like I said, I think X-Force it's a fascinating idea, and I really enjoyed talking to you. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show to talk X-Force, and come back anytime you want.
Anytime you want. We can do this once a month if you want.
I would totally do it once a month. Trust me, I'd schedule you once a month whenever you just have like a day, like every day on the 13th.
You know what I'll say? I will say this. Issue 3 there'll be several pivot points in the first sort of long story. There will be issues where there's a clear, like, okay, something new just got introduced or something big got taken away. Okay. Maybe we just assume we have a standing date. Like, once you realize you just saw a pivot, because you might not realize it until the following issue after the one where it happens, but say, hey, okay, let's talk.
All right, that'd be
because
absolutely perfect.
yeah, I
And like
will
I
say
said,
that every good story, like serial fiction story, becomes more complex as it goes forward.
okay,
Because theoretically you're getting the groundwork for increased complexity. So it might seem simple, but that's by intent. It seems simple at the beginning so we can all get our feet in the water. That's all I'm going to say.
okay. Like so, like I said, we'll talk either October or early November about what the next pivot. And I think it was a good time. Thank you so much.
Yes, me too. Thank you very much.
Have a
Love
good
it.
night. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Vertus Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Return for the next episode when Krista Grant returns to the mothership to discuss Worthy Chaos, now on Kickstarter. To next voyage, travel on.